footprint plant, you're familiar with that, correct?
Yes.
That plant is in New England, and it was subject to significant delays, correct?
It was subject to delays, yes.
And the ISO did not terminate their capacity supply application, correct?
I don't think that they, as per their tariff, I don't think that they were faced with a decision to terminate their CSO. They didn't close out of their obligation. They delayed it by 1 year, or deferred it.
Okay, we'll come back to that, but you would agree with me that there are a number of plants in New England that have met the time deadlines imposed by ISO.
Sure.
In fact, as far as you know, the two that are under construction that we talked about yesterday are in accordance with those time deadlines. The canal and the other one is escaping me, but the two that are currently under construction.
Bridgeport Harbor.
Thank you. As far as you know, they've met those time deadlines.
Yeah, I believe what I testified is that I believe Bridgeport Harbor is on schedule, and I was unsure of the canal schedule.
With regard to footprint, you're aware, or are you aware, that ISO made a filing with FERC to develop rules that would have allowed it to defer? In other words, let me back up. Deferral wasn't always an option, was it?
No.
And so ISO made a filing with FERC that would allow it to give a one-time deferral, correct?
I believe that's true, yes.
And that filing was essentially made in order to accommodate footprint, wasn't it?
I don't know that it was specifically made to accommodate footprint. I think it was made based on the realization that the three-year forward capacity market in terms of clearing the CSO and then coming online does not match up very well with the amount of time that it takes to permit and construct a facility. The ISO is specifically on the record with understanding the dilemma that developers face. So I think that was part of a concession or a change in the rules that allowed for that. And I think they understand that even with that 1 year deferral, there is still an issue for developers related to permitting and meeting CSO obligations.
For some developers, not all developers.
Not all developers.
Now, I think Member Coit asked you this question, but you would agree, to the extent you know, that the deferral rules have requirements that go along with them, correct? If you know.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by the question.
Let me restate it. If you defer and you've made profits by covering your CSO, you couldn't keep those profits, correct?
I believe that's the case, yes.
Okay.
Is that set out in the tariff?
I'm not sure, actually. I mean, I would have to go back to the tariff and specifically review on. I mean, I think if you defer, I'm not sure there are any profits associated with it.
Well, Mr. Walker covers this in detail in his testimony. He's probably the better witness because it sounds like Mr. Walker is more familiar with the deferral rules. So I think the best thing to do would be to pose the question to Mr. Walker. But I want to make sure it gets covered. In this, or in any case, a power plant that seeks a license from this board or a similar board basically has an initial decision to make. They can either first obtain the CSO before they file, or they can file for a license and then proceed to try to obtain a CSO, correct?
Certainly.
And in this case, Invenergy made the decision that it was going to file before it had a CSO, correct?
That's correct.
They could have waited until they got the Unit 1 CSO and then filed, or they could have not filed at all, correct? I mean, this was all their choice.
Yes.
And in this particular case, Invenergy is seeking a license from this board for both units, not just one, correct?
That's correct.
And as we've established, it never had a CSO for the second unit, correct?
That's correct.
So on page 9, we're still on page 9? Oh, if we could bring his testimony back up. Oh, thank you. That was fast. Again, on page 9, lines 11 through 15. I covered this just a second ago, and you stated there, additionally, ISO&E has acknowledged that this is a problem, not just for Invenergy, but for all power plant developers. You see that?
Yes.
And as we've clarified, you didn't really mean all power plant developers, because all of them are not having this problem with timing, correct?
Well, I guess, glad that you asked that. Probably what I should have said is, it certainly is a problem that's I think, it's part of the development process. I don't know that it is necessarily specific to specific developers, but more so I think it is an issue based on the overall state process. Invenergy's developed a number of plants, and it's probably a better question for Invenergy, but I think they develop a number of plants throughout the U.S., both thermal and renewable. In many cases, develop those, on a much tighter schedule than this one.
Now, if a developer has a CSO and it seeks to cover that obligation in an ARA or in a bilateral transaction, there's no guarantee that it's ever going to be able to do so, correct?
That's correct.
And if in fact capacity in a particular zone is particularly tight, it's going to be more difficult to cover, correct?
Potentially.
So have you read the testimony filed by ISO, Mr. Ethier, when they were explaining to FERC why they wanted to institute the ability to defer for a year?
I'm familiar with the testimony, but I don't think that I have read it in total, no.
You have read the quotes that are in Mr. Walker's testimony?
I have.
And one of those statements, testimony, not just a statement, but testimony by Mr. Ethier on behalf of ISO, says, where a new resource is most needed, it is unlikely to be able to cover its obligation. This is true because a new resource is most likely to clear an FCA in an import-constrained zone when that zone is short of capacity. An additional capacity is required to meet load. That being the case, there will be, by definition, no other resource in that zone with excess capacity. And because only the needed new resource will have cleared, it is unlikely that there will be available substitute resources that can cover the delayed resources obligations, end quote. You agree with that testimony, don't you?
I agree with that statement.
Okay. And we've established that Invenergy was able to cover its CSO in 2 years in a row, correct?
Yes,
And we are in an import constrained zone, correct?
that's correct.
On page 10, beginning on line 3, you state that a power generation developer carefully weighs the financial risks to ensure that the facility will be profitable over the long term, correct?
Correct.
And isn't a large part of the profitability of a power plant in these times dependent on the stream of payments that a capacity supply obligation provides?
That's certainly a part of it.
Isn't it a large part of it?
Yeah, I think it depends on the power plant, the location, the market.
Let's assume a power plant located in Rhode Island in the current market.
That would certainly be a part of it, yes. A large part, it could be a large part. It depends on the prevailing energy prices. It depends on the ancillary service prices. It depends on the capacity prices. So in any given year, it could be a large part or it could be a small part.
Well, let's talk about now.
Okay. Is there a question?
In this market right now, would capacity payments be a large part of a developer's profitability
In what year?
today?
Today, as in a power plant in 2018 or a power plant in 2021, which I'm not trying to be evasive of the question. I think if you're asking what percentage is capacity versus energy, I'm saying it's highly dependent on the year, the specific year that we're talking about in terms of the projected energy and capacity prices.
Okay, I'm talking about energy capacity prices today, as they exist today.
Okay.
January 9th, 2019.
Yes, thank you.
So in 2019, capacity prices would be a significant part of the overall financial, the earnings for a power plant in 2019. Yes.
Thank you very much. With regard to your economic benefits calculations, you've changed them several times since the original filing, correct?
When you say economic benefits, do you mean ratepayer savings or something else?
Ratepayer savings is fine.
They have changed, yes.
At least 3 times, 4 times?
I believe I have a table in my testimony. Page 16.
Yes. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 figures.
2 of them are the same, but yes.
Then 6 rows, so 6 changes.
Yes.
Your current estimate of savings, as I'm reading your December 14th testimony, appears to me, correct me if I'm wrong, to range from a low of $41 million, which is set forth on page 24, line 11, to a high of $286 million, which is set forth on page 16, line 1. Did I read that properly?
I believe my current estimate is on the table at the top of page 16, which is 228 million to 286 million.
But you did estimate, you did state on page 24, line 11. I guess we go to that, take a look at it.
Yeah, so on page 24, I ran what I referred to as a high renewable scenario, and under that scenario, the ratepayer savings is $41 million.
All right. So is it fair to say that under the various scenarios you've looked at, that the low is 41 million and the high is the 286 million?
It's fair to say under this scenario, the projected savings would be 41 million.
Okay. And again, we assume that these savings assume that both correct units 1 and 2 will qualify for and receive CSOs in FCA 14.
That's correct.
Mr. Hardy, just looking at the chart on the top of 16, can you just simply explain why the low in your range is twice as much on the 14th of December as it was on the 9th of January?
Absolutely. So part of the reason that low has moved up is the online date, the range for ratepayer savings now has been pushed out. I always tried to calculate it. I mean, we have the ability to run models going out 20, 30 years. In this particular analysis, I've tried to keep the time frame much shorter to look at impacts over 5-year period. With the online date now pushing out to 2023, the end date has pushed out to 2026, whereas the previous estimates were ending in 2024. The market in the mid-2020s is projected to be a lot tighter. So we're seeing an increase, even on the low end of the range, we're seeing an increase in capacity savings associated with that. So
okay. I understand that. So it looks like here the January 9th was, as you mentioned, a 5-year period. So you're not only showing a savings that significantly increases, that total is only over a 3-year period, correct?
4-year period, I guess. 4 as compared to counting 23, 24, 25, 26 would be 4-year period.
Okay. And the other then was a 6-year period.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
So
in the, if I understand the question, so the range, the 6-year period, and that estimate from January 9th, the savings in the early period, we had a staggered start date for Clear River, so we had Clear River 1 clearing the capacity market in 2019, but not coming on until, I believe, 2020, and then Clear River 2 was not coming on until 21 or 22. So the savings in the first few years are lower because of that staggered start date, and because even though Clear River 1 had cleared that FCA 10, we were not assuming it would be online for that date.
So is the December 14th assumes 1 and 2 starting in 2023?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
And staying with that, if we could bring up page 16, please. Thank you. So, staying with that, starting at line 6, and in that paragraph, the 228 million consists of, this is your base case, correct?
That's correct.
Consists of 196 million in capacity savings and only 32 million in energy savings, correct?
Correct.
And if I've done my math right, which is definitely possible, I didn't, but if I've done my math right, that's about 86% is capacity savings, is that correct?
I'll take your word for it.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but how about subject to check?
We'll check it at lunch.
There you go. And as we've established, those capacity savings will not happen if there is no CSO awarded in FCA 14, correct?
That's correct.
Now, in preparing your various estimates in the past, you provided the parties with the assumptions and the backup data that you used in your calculations, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've responded to all data requests from town and CLF as required throughout the process.
Well, for example, you did a pretty thorough update on January 9th, 2018, correct?
Correct.
And you did supplement the response to town 42-2. In fact, all of set 42 in this regard, correct?
Sorry.
You provided the backup for your new calculations in January, and you supplemented your data response, or you answered the data response that provided all the supporting documentation.
Correct.
So, for example, you said that you put together an exhibit, it was a confidential exhibit, I'm not going to produce any of the numbers in it, but you provided all of the relevant assumptions. You had information in there about when it would clear, the resulting capacity prices, assumptions on retirements, natural gas prices, allowance prices, and other key market assumptions. And they were all provided in a spreadsheet, correct?
Correct.
Again, I'm not going into any of that information. I'm just talking about it from an overview standpoint.
Sure.
My question is, why did you not provide a similar update for the information in your December 14th testimony?
I can easily provide that update. I think maybe it's just a function of time more than anything else. I was asked to supplement my testimony in a pretty constrained time frame. Not only update the analysis, but update the testimony in a very tight time frame for December 14th. Certainly have all of those calculations and can provide that.
But the reality is...
If I may, I'm sorry, I do need to object. I just checked on this with Ms. Verdi. The data request that Mr. McElroy is referring to specifically sought the information with respect to the January 2019 forecast. Am I correct?
Yes, and in fact, it's specifically 42. Yes, and in fact, specifically in the 42nd set of data requests, it would cite to certain things that are referenced in Mr. Hardy's testimony, and then said, please provide the analysis and all supporting documentation regarding a statement he made previously. That wasn't asked.
So
Wait, did you mean 2018 when you just said 2019?
I'm sorry, the January?
January 2018, correct. So with that said, I want to create the impression that we somehow held anything back. With that said, if this board or Mr. McElroy, and I assume you are, if you're interested in seeing the similar type of backup for his December 2018 forecast, and I know some of that again will be confidential, but we can, subject to the NDA, in response to another record request, I think it's the only formal way we can do it, we'd be happy to provide it.
Yeah, my feeling on this is that I was surprised it wasn't provided, because I don't have the burden of proof here. My brother has the burden of proof. And Mr. Hardy has put these numbers in his testimony, but he has not provided the backup for the experts for CLF and the town to review and confirm, determine whether or not there's anything in there that we could challenge. And it's actually too late for us to do that. The filing of testimony is closed. The witnesses are, as we can see, on the stand right now. So I appreciate my brother's offer, but it seems to come a little bit too late. My feeling is that these new numbers that Mr. Hardy has testified to simply don't have the required backup to them to be admitted by this board or accepted by this board at this point in time.
Well, this testimony is in evidence in full. We've met our burden. The numbers are in the record. Mr. McElroy, with all due respect, can say what he wants about it, but he did not ask for any further information about these numbers as he did with respect to January 9, as Ms. Verdi just pointed out. So again, if this board wants to see the backup as part of its determination of whether or not we've met the burden of proof, be happy to provide it to you. But Mr. McElroy's suggestion that this reflects that we didn't meet our burden, or that we somehow held something back, is simply incorrect. The question was never asked like it was previously.
Well, discovery is closed, so we're not in a position to be able to ask for more data. It should have been provided, in my opinion, in order to substantiate his expert opinion. If you don't provide the basis for your opinion, the opinion is not entitled to be given any weight and the burden is not met. So I certainly am suggesting that with regard to these December 14th numbers, that burden has not been met. It was not our burden, nor was it possible for us to even ask for the backup. This board, of course, can always do so.
Well, that's why there's cross-exam, Chairperson. That's why Mr. Hardy's here being asked questions by Mr. McElroy about these numbers. That's what cross-exam is all about.
But I can't ask him any questions about his backup information because I don't have it.
Sure he can. He can ask him, what's your backup for this information? I think what Mr. McElroy, with all due respect to him, is complaining about is that he's going to ask a question that he doesn't know the answer to. And lawyers don't like doing that on cross-exam. But the bottom line is that's what cross-exam is for.
I'm not sure what you're asking me to do.
I've established that the backup has not been provided, and I believe, and I will certainly argue in my closing and or my post-hearing brief, that these figures in the December 14th testimony cannot be accepted by this board because the appropriate basis for them has not been provided.
I don't think that this is the appropriate time to start arguing about the burden of proof since we are in the midst of hearing testimony. So
Okay.
ask whatever questions you want to on cross-examination, and if the information is available, we'll find it out.
Well, my suggestion would be, as my brother seems to have also suggested, is that because I'm foreclosed from asking additional data requests because discovery is closed, but this board, of course, can always ask additional record requests, that this board ask the similar backup information, the December 14th calculations, that Mr. Hardy provided in January for those calculations.
I don't know that we actually need them, but if anyone else is interested in getting them, we can make a record request.
Well, Mr. Hardy, you just said you can easily provide them. To quote back your comment, correct?
Yes.
So I think we should then, if you can easily provide them and there's the argument that they're needed to make these sentences, please provide them so we can do a request.
So we'll make that a record request. Which would be board record request 14.
Thank you very much. Can I move on?
Please do.
Thank you. Page 17, please. Now on lines 12 through 18, you provided a summary of the overview of some of the changes you made in your assumptions, correct?
Correct.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears to me that you've assumed 1.4 gigawatts of offshore wind. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've added 1 gigawatt of utility scale solar.
Correct.
You've added 200 megawatts of energy storage.
Correct.
You assumed offshore wind would clear an FCA. Is that correct?
I don't think I said that.
But did you? And did you assume that offshore wind would clear an FCA?
I would have to check, but my opinion that offshore wind is not going to enter the market competitively through clearing an FCA. It's going to enter the market through securing a bilateral contract through one of the state-driven RFP processes.
All right, but you did add 1.4 gigawatts to your new unit assumptions.
That's correct.
What about the utility scale solar? Did you assume that the 1 gigawatt of utility scale solar would clear an FCA?
No, it's a similar process to the offshore wind.
All right. Did you modify any of your retirement assumptions from your January 9th, 2018 response?
I believe some of the dates on the retirements may have changed. And also the time period has shifted. So there are retirements in the 2025, 2026 timeframe that wouldn't have shown up before because the analysis stopped in 2024. But that's certainly something that we can provide as part of the backup detail.
Do you know if you were showing that the retirements are going to occur sooner than you originally predicted in January of 2018 or later?
I don't think there were material changes on assumptions around the existing retirements. I believe a majority of those are still expected to retire along the same time frame.
What about behind the meter photovoltaic? Did you modify any of your assumptions from January 9th?
I don't believe so.
I have a question about offshore wind. You said earlier you thought 5 to 6 gigawatts would be coming on board in the next few years. I'm not sure we have a time frame.
Yeah, I think I said potentially longer.
Okay,
yeah.
in the next decade.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
How does that work in terms of if it's all not going through the FCA and the ISO New England needs to project the capacity that they need, and you just said that you don't think the offshore wind will get a CSO or go through that process. So how will that complex group of stakeholders that we talked about, need pool and all, and that whole process of projecting capacity work when we've got thousands of megawatts of new offshore wind?
It's a great question. I think some of the details are still to be worked out. I mean, that is, I think, probably one of the biggest challenges that the ISO faces from a planning perspective over the next decade is the changing resource mix and how to account for that and how to plan around it based on what the current market structure is. So I think it needs to change in some way, and some of those changes are already happening. One of those things is the change around the substitution auction, where renewables can bid into the capacity market to replace retiring resources. I'll put that to the side so we don't jump down that rabbit hole. The way that we think about it when we're projecting going forward, the need for new capacity, whether it's thermal or renewable, is we assume that, the megawatts that, say, if a 200 megawatt offshore wind plant comes in through a state-sponsored program, we assume that that capacity is counted towards reliability, towards meeting NICR, even though it probably won't come through the FCA competitive process. The one thing that I would note is, when you look at these numbers for renewable capacity, they are nameplate numbers. And so, a gigawatt of wind capacity is not the same as a gigawatt of clear room, or a gigawatt of wind capacity is going to count somewhere around 15 or 20% of its nameplate capacity towards reliability. And the more renewables that are added to the market, that number has the potential to change. You can see this if you look at a market like California. California has a tremendous amount of solar that's entered the market, which has completely changed how they think about planning and reliability, and it's also changed the portion of a megawatt of solar that will contribute towards peak demand. So simply put, the more solar that you put into the market, the less that next megawatt of solar will count towards reliability. If that makes sense.
I think it all made sense. It's definitely an interesting and complex set of issues.
Certainly.
Mr. Hardy, would you agree with me that when the ISO procures excess capacity, doing that has a tendency to suppress prices?
I think that's certainly one of the impact that can happen is it can suppress prices. And I think one of the other benefits of that, particularly if the ISO is procuring, new generation capacity that goes above the NICR, is you're bringing in new, efficient, lower emitting resources to replace older, less efficient, higher polluting resources. So you get a benefit on the capacity side, but you also get a benefit on the energy side when those plants are operating.
Agreed, but those benefits are essentially a function of ISO's acquisition policy. In other words, it decides that it's going to acquire resources in excess of the net installed capacity requirement. That in and of itself will result in savings to the ratepayers, correct?
Yes, overall I would agree with your statement. I wouldn't say that they decide. I don't think it's necessary. It's the clearing process is a pretty complex algorithm, so that it's not like they look at it and they're deciding whether to add that last megawatt of capacity. I think that's a function of the market, the FCA process trying to maximize social surplus.
And I don't disagree with you, but the point is that the savings associated with the acquisition of the surplus are a result of what the ISO does in the auction, as opposed to as a result of a particular plant, correct?
I agreed with your statement until the last part when you said a particular plant. I think all of the megawatts that clear a particular auction, again, are part of the package that results in the benefits or the reliability that's contributed to the system.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you very much.